one right there. Good one too. Nice. Let's see if I can get him up in the boat. Sweet! Look at that, guys. Hey guys, this is Gene Jensen. Today we're going to talk about fishing muddy water, the baits to use, everything that I know about catching bass when the water's muddy. All right, so before we talk about what to use and how to use it and everything that's in my tackle box when I'm fishing muddy water, let's talk about what happens to the bass when the water gets muddy. Where do they position themselves? How do you find them? Typically when it gets muddy like this, you know, I've got a visibility, and when I say muddy water, I mean a foot or less of visibility. I don't like anything less than 4 inches, but I mean this to 6 inches to a foot is wonderful. And right now we've got about a 6-inch visibility. And what bass do when it gets that muddy is they move shallow. One, the water's rising, so they move up to feed, and they are, and a lot of times, especially when the water's a little warmer, above 55 degrees, they'll move all the way to the bank and they'll be feeding on whatever is coming off the bank as that water rises, worms, crawfish, things like that. And also bait fish will move up shallow and do the same thing. So the bass are in there feeding on the bait fish. Another thing they do is they get really, really tight to cover. You want to, as you're running the bank and as you're flipping and pitching and whatever you're throwing, as you're running the bank, you look for the thickest cover that you can find. And when you see any type of cover, but especially thick cover, you want to make multiple casts with your lure. Grab a Texas rig creature bait. We'll talk about that in a minute. Flip it in and bounce it around and flip it multiple times. Get it in there. And this goes true with boat fishing, kayak fishing, and bank fishing. Is you want to find that thickest cover and you want to make multiple pitches into the thickest spot of that cover. And it could be 15, 20 casts later, you finally get that bass to turn and you hit him right square in the nose and he opens up his mouth and he bites it. So that's one of the things. But what you need to know is that the bass move very shallow. They get tight to cover. The reason they get tight to cover is, one, they don't feel really comfortable if they can't see something, especially largemouth bass. And so they want to get right up next to a log or right up next to a stump or a brush pile and get in there where they're really comfortable and where they feel like they're not lost, I guess is what you could say. They just kind of feel lost out in the middle of nowhere. So the types of shallow cover I look for, if you're on a lake that has boat docks, man, those shallow parts of those boat docks are usually dynamite. Any stumps, anything that you can see, and it's going to be cover that you can see, and that makes it easy to cover water. So go along the bank, watch for stumps, watch for logs, watch for brush piles, and make multiple casts at those brush piles and at that cover, and you'll be able to catch a lot of fish when it gets good and muddy. All right, so let's talk about the tackle that I have in my tackle bag if I'm bank fishing, or in my boat if I'm on the boat. All right, so before I start talking about the lures, let's be sure to check down in the description anything that I'm using and that I talk about in this video. I'm going to have links to the Tackle Warehouse links down in the description. You can go check them out. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, and be sure to hit the like button. Man, these videos are a lot of fun. I'm so glad to be back into filming instructional videos. So anyway, let's get going. All right, so let's talk about the tackle that I have. And before we talk about tackle, let's talk about the colors that you choose. You know, a lot of people say use black and blue and use bright chartreuse and white and stuff in muddy water. You know what? I say the same thing. The colors that you want to avoid are the green pumpkins and the browns, and anything that you hold up to the sun and you can see the light through, you want to put those away. You want to pull out some simple colors. One, black and blue, black and purple, black and black is one color. This is a chatterbait, but anything flipping bait, I'm gonna have a black and blue bait on. See if I can get that out. You know, anything black and blue, if you're gonna flip it into heavy cover, they can just pick up on it faster and pick on it. You know, you get it right down in front of their mouth, in front of their face, and within that strike zone, they can pick up on it quicker and they can grab it. The bright colors, especially when it's sunny, I love to throw chartreuse and white, especially on the moving baits, more like square bills and spinner baits. And so that kind of keeps it pretty simple. Black and blue, black and purple. I like black and red black with red flake on sunny days because it gives you a little bit of flash. If there's no sun on it, if there's no sun out, don't worry about the flash. But typically when it's sunny like this, I like to have some type of a flake, like blue flake or red flake. And that'll a lot of times get you a lot more bites. When bass are in muddy water, one thing that they do is they stop using their eyes. Of course, they can't see. It's muddy water. They can't see at all. So what they use is they use their lateral line to detect vibration. So the lures that you want to choose, you want them to appeal to the bass through their lateral line. So vibrating baits, rattling baits, anything that has, even creature baits that have a lot of things that are kicking. And so that's what I'm going to go through. I'm going to go through what I have laid out, what I catch fish on continually every time it gets muddy. And it literally can fit in a little bitty bag because there's not a whole lot. One of the baits that I always have right at my feet, always have tied on, if I'm bank fishing, it's always on one rod, is going to be a Texas rig creature bait. This is a rage bug and got a lot of kicking, a lot of vibration when it falls. And I usually don't put a heavy weight on it. This is just a 5/16 ounce tungsten weight. I peg it because I'm throwing it into heavy cover, and I found that if you can peg it, it won't get hung up nearly as much. Heavy wire hook, I'm fishing it on 50-pound braided line, so I've got a heavy wire flipping hook, or a heavy wire worm hook would work too, but just make sure that it is a heavy wire hook, or you'll bend it out on the hook set. And absolutely a must when I have it when I'm fishing it, and I'm always fishing it on a medium heavy rod. This is a 7.5 medium heavy, but if you don't have a creature bait, Texas rig creature bait tied on, you're missing out. All right, so the next one I want to talk about, and probably one of my favorite things to fish in the world, and you guys that have been watching my videos for a long time will know this, is I love to fish a jig. I just love a jig bite. And so when I'm fishing muddy water, I'm going to go between that Texas rig and the jig. But the jig that I always choose is one that's got a big wide head. I don't like a football jig because it gets hung up in the grass. And so far, the best one that I've found is this Denny Brauer structure jig. It's hard to get it hung up a lot of times, and I'm pitching it into heavy cover. But a must is a rattle. I want you guys to hear that. I put rattles on all of my jigs when I'm fishing muddy water. I try to put them on all my jigs no matter what, because they never can hurt. They can only help. And then I like again, a trailer that's got a little bit of beef to it. This is a rage bug, a zoom chunk, and the colors I'll go over were black and blue, black and red, or purple, or black and purple if you can find it. But a zoom chunk, anything that really puts off some good vibration. Another thing that I might do with a jig, this is the trick that I don't tell a whole lot of people, is what I typically do, and I haven't done it to this jig yet, but I will trim it way up to where the skirt's really short. One thing to understand about jig skirts is the shorter they get, the faster they flare open when they hit the bottom. So if you're fishing really shallow, if you cut that jig skirt short, I mean right at the end of the hook, when it hits, it'll go and it'll open up really quick, and it will get a really good reaction strike. A lot of what I really love is big heavy living rubber, and I'll cut that short because that living rubber, if it's tied properly or hand tied, that living rubber will go whoop and it'll pop right open, and it will basically scare the bass into biting. So that's one of the little tricks I do with a jig, but a jig with a rattle is a must. All right, so next is a chatterbait, and you guys know I love throwing a chatterbait, especially in the springtime. But my favorite one, and still is my favorite after years, is the Project Z Chatterbait by Z-Man. And I usually pair it up with a matching trailer. This one right here is a Diesel Minnow by Z-Man. I'll use that, and they've got a new one. Let's see if I can find it in my bag. I got a new one out I haven't tried yet, but I just picked it up. Is a Razor Shads, and that looks like it's right on perfect for a chatterbait, but may try that a little bit later on if I want a beefier profile. But a chatterbait is a must. Just don't fish it around wood cover. Usually in grass, I'll throw a chatterbait and it will wear them out. They just typically get hung up in the wood unless you use a weedless one. What they have them now with weed guards, and so that's what I would use if that was the case. All right, so the next one is a moving bait, and that would be a square bill. Now with square bills, I don't typically use dark colors. Boy, this one's got sticky hooks. but I don't typically use dark colors. I like to use chartreuse and black, or just something that's mostly chartreuse. This right here is a 6 cents flat 75, crushed flat 75, and this one is a 1.5 square bill, a KVD 1.5 from Strike King. But these are the two that I would choose to fish anywhere in shallow. This one dives about 8 feet deep on the max, and this one is right at about 4 or 5 feet, depending on the line I put it on. So you take these, you just beat them off a cover. The trick is to a square bill is you've got to take it and bounce it off of something. And when you bump it, that's when you're going to get that reaction strike. That fish is going to come up and just smash it. So bounce them off everything you can, but I love square bills, absolutely. Probably not good for bank fishing. Better out of kayak and boats, because if you get hung up, you can go get them. But definitely going to try it if you can get out on the water and retrieve your bait. All right, so last but not least is a spinnerbait. Now, I love it. It's always going to be a 3/8 ounce spinnerbait in the muddy water, because I'm throwing shallow. So I don't ever buy a chartreuse spinnerbait heavier than a 3/8 ounce. Half ounce just goes too deep, and I don't really need it because the bass are going to be shallow. But the argument is always between the blades. You know, I'm going to have to throw a chartreuse and white. I'm going to throw a chartreuse spinnerbait, but I've got a Colorado blade and I've got a willow leaf blade. And a lot of people say, well, in muddy water, you want to have a Colorado blade because it puts off more vibration. And I always wondered why I caught more fish on big lakes with a willow leaf blade, and not as many with a Colorado blade, no matter what the water conditions. And I was watching Matt Allen do a video the other day, and he was talking about muddy water spinnerbaits. And he made a good point. He said that that a willow leaf blade works better in lakes that have shad, and which makes sense. It has the profile of a shad, and by the time the bass get to it, they really see it. Now this is a little bit of a small blade. I kind of want one bigger than that, but I don't have one in the boat. And then a Colorado blade really works good in farm ponds. So if you're fishing a muddy farm pond, use a Colorado blade. If you're fishing a big lake, start off with a willow leaf blade and then go to a Colorado blade. But this ought to be your first, the first bait you try. All right, so let's talk about line choice. You know, with stained and muddy water, you really don't have to worry about the bass seeing your line. You don't have to worry about them being line shy. So, you know, when you're fishing heavy cover, so make sure that you've got braided lines, 50-pound, 60-pound braid, or 65-pound braid, something like that when you're, you know, for your flipping and pitching baits. And then anything else, you kind of want to beef up your poundage of your line just a little bit. On my crankbaits, on my lipless crankbaits, on my chatterbaits, and my spinnerbaits, I'm using all 15-pound line. It's fluorocarbon doesn't matter. It just happens to be what I have on the reel. But when you're flipping into that heavy cover, use braided line, and when you're cranking and with your moving baits, use 15 or 17-pound line would be just fine. So that's line. It's not too difficult. It's not something you really have to think much about. Just make sure it's heavy. All right, some of the situations that you might encounter. One that comes to mind is if you're on a lake that has, you know, the lake's flooded, there's a lot of water up on the banks, and it gets into the bushes, into the willows, into the thick cover that's along the bank, and that happens all over the country, just not on this lake. But typically what I've found is that if you can get to the bank, in other words, if you can fish to where you're casting to shore, for some reason you're able to catch a little bit more bass. You'll find more bass in those areas. If you've got it flooded all the way back for several yards back and you can't reach the shore, a lot of times that's where the bass are, and if you can't get to them, you're pretty much wasting your time fishing the outside. The exception is when the water starts to fall, and as that water starts to fall, then they're going to pull out to those outside edges of all that bush. So if it starts to fall, then you go to those spots that had lots of water back in the woods, back in the bushes, and you start fishing that outside edge. And all those fish that were back in there, because there's going to be a lot of them, they're going to pull out to that outside edge. That's one of the conditions that you face. I've faced in several different places. Kentucky Lake, mostly along the Tennessee River, but Kentucky and Pickwick come to mind as some of the places where if you could get your I thought that was a fish, but nope, it's a log. If you can get your bait to the bank, you're more likely going to catch fish. So Quick little tip. All right, so this is a real quick tip. You know, a lot of guys, and I used to be this way, you worry about getting your bait hung up, so you're hesitant to throw it into the thickest part of the cover or over that dock or somewhere where it might get hung up. Now what I always say is make the cast, set the hook, and then worry about how you're going to get that fish out. If you get hung up, that's just part of the game. You just got to understand that that's where the big bass live. They live in that thickest part of the cover. They live in that, you know, as far back in that dock as you can get. They live in those roots of the trees. So if you want to catch the bigger bass, you've got to be willing and have the balls to get in there and get your bait into the thickest part of the cover and then worry about getting that fish out. So, all right, so let's talk about what happens in muddy water if the water is falling. If you've already had that flood and it's going up and now they're draining the lake and they're getting that water out, so the water's starting to fall, the bass don't want to be anywhere close to that shallow water. They don't want to get stuck up there. So what they do is they start to pull out. And like I said earlier, when you have a lot of water back in the bushes and the trees, they pull out to that outside edge. But say, look at this real quick. Say one day you're catching fish on stumps and this is two fence posts, but you're catching them on even the corners of docks and things like that, and then the water starts to fall. A lot of times the fish will just pull out from that cover a little bit. And so say, you know, when the water's rising, they've got their nose on that log or on that fence post, and then as the water starts to fall, they just kind of pull out deeper and deeper and deeper. So you may, what I typically do is I'll get to, if the water's falling, I'll throw at that stump, but I'll work the bait all the way back to the boat. I won't just throw to that stump and then come back in. I want to go there and I want to work the bait all the way back to the boat. And typically you'll catch a fish somewhere around, you know, a few feet out from it. All right, so another nice thing about fishing muddy water is you typically can get really close to the fish without spooking them. And so you can get close to these docks and make some little short pitches and little flips, and it won't affect the fish at all. I mean, you land in front of their nose, they're gonna bite. So for instance, look, see, I'm fishing this dock right here and I'm fishing with a jig. And one of the things you want to do when you're fishing with the Texas rig or the jig or anything is you want to get as close to that cover as you can. I pitch right up against that dock post, and then I let it sink to the bottom. I let it sit for a couple of seconds, and I go pop, pop, and I just shake it. I want that rattle to rattle, you know? And so, same thing, I'll throw to the next dock, and I'll make multiple casts if I can. The wind's gonna make it a little bit difficult, but if I can make multiple casts to that spot, shake it a couple times, bring it in, make another pitch, bad pitch, but shake it a couple times, bring it in, and do that over and over and over again. And if there's a fish on it, eventually it's going to bite. And you've really got to you got to have confidence that there's a fish there in order to make multiple casts. So typically I'll do that with docks like this. So the first one's inside pockets, a little bit deeper, and they've got a real nice shallow end to it. And I go up into that shallow end, I'll do the same thing, pitch in, and I'll make multiple pitches, you know, 3, 4, 5 pitches at each post. If I can keep the boat still, see if I can drop power poles and do it. And then move on to the next dock post. It's slow, it's methodical, but it works, it really does. All right, well, that's about all I know about fishing in muddy water. But be sure to check out my Fishing Shirt of the Month Club. Check out the rest of my videos and be sure to subscribe. But like I always say, be sure to introduce somebody to fishing. Introduce them to my channel, let me help you teach them how to fish. More importantly, get out on the water, go out and catch some fish, and have a great day. We'll see you.